now on BBC One, The News with Fiona Bruce and Mary Rhodes.
Commonwealth leaders agree Zimbabwe is to be suspended indefinitely. It will only be allowed back in after human rights and democratic reform. Tuition fees, the Chancellor backs Tony Blair and insists they won't be defeated. And the controversial Turner Prize this year, it goes to a transvestite potter. Good evening. After 3 days of tension and wrangling, Commonwealth leaders agreed tonight to suspend Zimbabwe indefinitely. The country had been excluded last year over allegations that its president, Robert Mugabe, had rigged the election in his favour. Division over what to do with Zimbabwe had dominated the summit in Nigeria. Now it will only be allowed back in if it implements human rights and democratic reforms. James Robin reports from the Nigerian capital, Abuja.
Tony Blair hung on for hours in Nigeria to get the deal he wanted. The Prime Minister delayed his departure, only flying out from here when he was quite satisfied that Zimbabwe now faces indefinite suspension and tough terms before the country will be allowed back. For South Africa's President Thabo Mbeki, heavy defeat. He had demanded Zimbabwe's immediate readmission, but Tony Blair kept turning up the heat as his officials blamed South Africa for defying the majority view.
I don't think anyone could see any possible justification for lifting the suspension now, and whatever threats Zimbabwe makes, I think people should treat them as they deserve to be treated.
For several African leaders, the day started in church, their continent split. Some urging a softer line to encourage President Mugabe to reform, others who believe he's damaging all Africa. Finally tonight, deadlock broken. After a terrible few days for the Commonwealth, its top executive hailed the outcome as a triumph.
This was one of the finest, strongest debates I've heard on international affairs probably ever. And the ability of people to ultimately come into the centre was quite remarkable.
So what must Zimbabwe do to get back to full Commonwealth membership? Show real movement back to democracy? The government must return to the rule of law, and readmission depends on passing a three-stage test, culminating in acceptance by all Commonwealth leaders. President Mugabe seems certain to resist, but will he take his country out of the Commonwealth rather than stop terrorising political opponents? The Commonwealth says negotiations between President Mugabe's party and the opposition are vital.
The key, as you will see in this, is reconciliation. That is the key. If there is sufficient reconciliation in such a way that, oh yes, people can say, oh yes, we are there, or we are about to be there.
As this bruising summit draws to a close, it's very clear Zimbabwe must be transformed before the empty flagpole here once again flies that country's flag.
I will talk to James in Abuja now. James, Robert Mugabe's been sounding very defiant, hasn't he? Saying he doesn't care if he's in the Commonwealth or not. So what difference is this going to make to Zimbabwe?
Well, two sides to this, I think, Fiona. First, the opposition in Zimbabwe, particularly the Movement for Democratic Change. I think they'll be very heartened by this. I spoke to a senior official of the opposition who's here in Abuja to be close to this meeting, and he said this was really wonderful news because it would give heart to the opposition and it would see off those who wanted to pursue a much softer option with President Mugabe. President Mugabe himself, well, he could, of course, try what he might believe is the Houdini-like option and simply spring out of the Commonwealth, take Zimbabwe out himself. I think the difficulty there for him might be that he would cause consternation in his own ruling ZANU-PF party among those who are fearful for their own future if they now accept that President Robert Mugabe's days are numbered and they have to position themselves for the world after that.
James, what about the Commonwealth? It took a lot of wrangling to get an agreement over this. What's the mood there now?
Well, I think the mood is sharply divided, frankly. This was a terrible meeting for them. Many of the leaders are very angry that the entire agenda was pretty well abandoned to the Zimbabwe crisis, that no other issues were discussed. On the other hand, the Commonwealth has reasserted to some extent its authority. It now has to follow through and to produce positive outcomes in Zimbabwe if it is to re-establish its credibility.
James, thanks very much. The Chancellor, Gordon Brown, says he's confident that the government will win its battle to let universities charge higher tuition fees. More than 150 Labour MPs and the main opposition parties have indicated that they'll oppose variable fees. But today Mr Brown backed the Prime Minister and insisted it was the right policy. Here's our political correspondent Sean Lay.
What Gordon Brown really thinks about tuition fees has been the subject of fevered speculation at Westminster. Many of his backbench supporters are in the rebel camp. Today was Mr Brown's opportunity to make clear whether he was with them or with the Prime Minister.
I know that the principles in which we base this reform are the right ones, that students, when they become graduates, because they benefit from the education, should make a contribution.
But the principle he didn't mention is the most controversial one, allowing different universities to charge different amounts. Labour MPs fear it'll mean students from poorer backgrounds opting out of the best universities to avoid bigger debts. Pressed on this issue of variable fees, Mr Brown chose his words with care.
Tony Blair has said that the variable fee is part of the system, and I can see how a variable fee can be complemented by a fair system of repayment.
But if backbenchers aren't convinced of that, the government could lose next month's vote on the floor of the Commons. The opposition parties have 249 MPs. If just 81 Labour rebels voted with them, the tuition fees policy would be wrecked. Already nearly twice that number, 156, have publicly signalled their doubts, including former Cabinet Ministers Robin Cook, Frank Dobson and Claire Short. The Conservatives believe Tony Blair is staring defeat in the face.
I hope that the Prime Minister will listen, not just to the many people in his own party who are unhappy with this policy, but listen to us, listen to students, listen to people across the country.
But if defeat is to be avoided, the listening has to start at Westminster. The ministerial charm offensive begins here tomorrow night with the first of a series of seminars designed to win over rebel MPs. The government is confident it can persuade some, but can it win over enough to prevent a humiliating parliamentary defeat? Sean Lay, BBC News, Westminster.
At least one American soldier has died and 2 others were injured in an explosion in the northern Iraqi city of Mosul. The US military convoy was travelling through the centre of the city when it came under attack. Earlier in Baghdad, a 12-year-old boy was killed by a bomb, believed to have been left by anti-coalition militants. The American military in Afghanistan is investigating the deaths of 9 children in an attack led by US forces in the east of the country. A spokesman said the intended target, a Taliban militant, was also killed in the air raid. He said the Americans regretted any loss of innocent life. Early results from Russia's parliamentary election indicate a clear lead for the party backed by President Putin. With just over 10% of the votes counted, the United Russia Party has so far won more than a third of the vote. From Moscow, Steve Rosenberg reports.
After the dullest of campaigns, Russia's election today, just for a moment, threatened to come to life. Politician Vladimir Zhirinovsky got into an argument with a voter. The Prime Minister, Mikhail Kasyanov, got an egg. At least, he said, it showed Russia was a democracy. For Vladimir Putin, though, these elections went like clockwork. In this poll, he backed the pro-Kremlin bloc, United Russia. It received more resources, more media coverage than any other party, and it worked. At this polling station in Moscow, most of the people we spoke to said they'd come to support the Kremlin's choice. Katya was voting for the first time. United Russia, she said, was the only hope for her country. Soon after the vote count began, United Russia emerged as the clear, if not unsurprising, winner. As results trickled in from across the country to Election Central, the face of Russian politics seemed to be changing before the eyes. Nationalist parties were surging, the communists faltering, and Russian liberal parties struggling even to make it into parliament. Results which appeared to give Vladimir Putin tonight an even tighter grip on his parliament and on power.
And Steve Rosenberg is in Moscow now. Steve, what does this result, so strongly pro-Putin, tell us about what's going on in Russia at the moment?
Well, first of all, they tell us that the Kremlin is able to engineer an election result. So Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin do enormous sums of money, enormous resources to help United Russia win this election. United Russia got a lot of play on state television, and there are also reports that the Kremlin sent instructions to regional leaders to make sure that United Russia got more votes than any party. So I think it shows that the Kremlin is certainly increasing its power in Russia today.
Steve, thanks very much indeed. Police in North London are warning women not to go out jogging alone after a 39-year-old woman was stabbed while running in a park. It happened on Friday night in Stoke Newington. Detectives believe the attacker could be the same man who murdered an American woman in a similar attack last February. The winner of this year's Turner Prize for Contemporary Art was announced a short time ago at the Tate Britain in London. The event proved as controversial as ever, with a £20,000 prize going to the cross-dressing potter Grayson Perry. Our arts correspondent, Rosie Millard, was there. There's flash photography in her report.
Grayson Perry is contemporary British art's most famous ceramicist. Perry, also known as Claire, is also British art's most famous transvestite, as he acknowledged, collecting this year's Turner Prize.
Well, it's about time a transvestite potter won the Turner Prize.
Perry has been acclaimed for bringing attention to the often underrated art form of ceramics. His recent show at London's Barbican Centre was what brought the attention of the award judges. And highlighting different art forms is exactly what the Turner Prize is all about, said the chair of the judges.
The Turner Prize surprises all kinds of people because it presents them with new things and things with which they're not familiar, and that's part of its purpose.
Perry's vases tackled difficult subjects. The artist was clear, however, about his appeal.
Because I'm open, human, honest, and spend hours going like this. You know, so their 8-year-old daughter couldn't have done it.
Critics of the Turner Prize will say this result is just typical of the headline-grabbing award. However, the Tate's comment cards, filled in by members of the public who've seen the show, indicate that the majority of people visiting wanted Grayson to win, so this is the popular choice. Rosie Millard, BBC News, Tate Britain.
Now with news of today's Premiership action and all the rest of the day's sport, here's Mary Reid.
Thanks very much, Fiona. Well, Southampton have moved up 5 places in the Premiership table to 8th after a thrilling 3-2 win over Charlton at St Mary's. And the goalless draw with Manchester City was enough to move Everton out of the relegation zone.
Charlton may be enjoying their best ever start to the Premiership, but Southampton still seem pleased to see them. The home side were even happier 4 minutes later, when defender Michael Spenson's deflection squeezed them into an early lead, a sizzling start to a cold South Coast day. Gordon Strachan was comfier still when his side's fast-flowing football gained further reward, the ever-impressive James Beattie teeing up Brett Ormerod, who wasn't to be denied on the stroke of half-time.
Right on half-time.
Within 30 seconds of the restart, though, Charlton pulled the goal back and the game turned. Scott Parker emphasising a talent that many think has been overlooked for too long by Sven-Göran Eriksson. And if the England manager was impressed with his first strike, he, like everyone else, must have been simply astounded by his second.
Fantastic! He's done it again!
A simply sublime finish that looked to have rescued a point for Charlton. But Saints were to have the last word, the scrappy nature of Brett Ormerod's late winner belying the sheer quality of the football on show from both sides. Quality was a virtue that was sadly lacking in the day's earlier game. Manchester City and Everton playing out a dour goalless draw, and further highlighting the reasons behind both teams' current struggles. Thomas Gravesen did almost end Everton's goal drought near the end, but a point was enough to lift his side out of the Premiership relegation zone and provide some sort of reward from a desperate game. Paul Stainton, BBC News.
Well, the FA Cup can always be relied on to produce a shock, and in the second round this afternoon, conference side Scarborough defeated second division Port Vale at Vale Park. Wayne Gill's pass released a winger Ashley Sestanovic to score the only goal of the game just 10 minutes from time. Their reward is a third-round tie at Southend. The draw for the third round produced a couple of interesting ties, including financially troubled Leeds United against the holders Arsenal. Manchester United travelled to Aston Villa, the side they defeated 4-0 yesterday in the league. Chelsea are given a trip to First Division Watford, while Liverpool are away to Third Division Yeovil Town. The ties will be played on the 3rd and 4th of January. Partick Thistle finally have a victory to celebrate, their first in the Scottish Premier League this season. They beat Motherwell 1-0 at Firhill. John Paul McBride drove a powerful shot from the edge of the box to give the Jags 3 points for the first time since May. In the day's other game, Aberdeen beat Hibernian 3-1. Edinburgh pulled off the shock of the day in Rugby Union's Heineken Cup, defeating the holders Toulouse at Meadowbank. Trailing by 7 points at the break, Edinburgh dominated the second half, and a late try from Brendan Laney eventually secured a 23 points to 17 win. Wasps beat last year's runners-up, Perpignan, 28-7. And there's special coverage of England's Rugby World Cup victory parade on BBC One from 11:30 tomorrow morning. Definitely the warmest place to watch it, I should think. That's the sport. Fiona.
Thanks, Mary. Well, let's see what the weather's going to be like for that victory parade with Peter Gibbs.
Thanks, Fiona. Yeah, I think you'll need a few extra layers underneath that England rugby jersey tomorrow. It is going to be cold out there, but it looks fine. It should stay bright as well. Nice warm glow coming off the crowd, I'm sure, in central London. But it's certainly cold out there tonight. We've got a widespread frost already. We're looking at temperatures getting down to -3, -4, perhaps as low as -7 through parts of the Scottish Highlands. The Northern Isles, though, staying a little bit milder, and the southwest corner of England also holding temperatures a little bit above freezing, partly because of the wind, but also because we'll see some cloud drifting in here towards the end of the night. So a little bit more in the way of cloud across southernmost areas tomorrow than we saw today. But from the North Midlands northwards, it looks like another bright and sunny day. That cloud, though, just slowly drifting up through the Midlands, but probably stopping short of northern England. Wales, though, turning rather more cloudy, and along the south coast, maybe the odd spitting spot of rain through the second half of the day. It's going to be a cold day everywhere. In fact, temperatures struggling to get above freezing at all through parts of the Scottish Highlands, perhaps the central lowlands, where there could be the odd touch of fog overnight as well. Highest temperatures across most of England and Wales, around about 4 or 5 degrees. But again, in that southwest corner, turning a little bit milder, 9 or 10 degrees. The wind's beginning to change direction, and that's the key to the forecast for the middle part of the week. Those winds switching round to a much milder southwesterly, so we will see, I think, a bit of a change coming through. So still pretty frosty at first for this week, slowly turning milder through Tuesday and Wednesday, but those stronger winds also bringing in a fair amount of cloud and eventually some rain as well. Fiona.
Thanks, Peter. The main news tonight: after 3 days of intense discussions, Commonwealth leaders have agreed that Zimbabwe should be suspended indefinitely. And in the last few minutes, reports from Zimbabwe quote the country's leader, Robert Mugabe, as saying that he has decided to quit the Commonwealth with immediate effect. There's been no official confirmation of that. That's the latest. There'll be news throughout the night over on News 24. From Mary and from me, good night.
Join us as we pay tribute to the World Cup heroes. Sue Barker hosts England Champions of the World tomorrow morning on BBC One from 11:30.
Stewed an egg's head and sold one to trigger. Lovely jubbly.
Well, how about some money?
Christy, I am paying for all this. Right, drinks all round.
Come here, Tony wants a little Christmas gift.
I'm scared. Easy, fella. Somebody help me.
What's the matter, darling? Don't you find me attractive?
Do those impressions. Go on, they're brilliant. All right, princess.
All right, babe.
Oh, you're
Can you do my mate Griffey?
You are my girl, you're my biscuit. I'm gonna say it again in case you missed it.
Will you pull my cracker? Come on, Rodney, it's Christmas.
I'll pull your cracker.
Bullfighting?
Yeah. You are looking at Victoria Doll. Don't play with your food, Nick.
Just calm. Fight! Nick.
Disgusting.
Gravy wars. Have some of that.
Staying here for Christmas.
We've got the whole family over this year. Christmas comedy on the BBC.
Charlton Heston and Ava Gardner star in Earthquake tomorrow night at 11:15. Now on BBC One, it's sometimes the simplest idea that can make the biggest difference, as Kevin Spacey finds out. Some violent scenes and images which some viewers may find upsetting in Pay It Forward.